So for tonight, I have 2 yoga blocks and a short foam roller. Um, the foam roller is not necessary, but for a couple of things, it might be more accessible with the short foam roller. A long foam roller will probably be too awkward. So in tonight's class, we're going to look at the pelvis, which is this bowl, this bone. It's kind of shaped like a bone, a bowl, and it does several movements. It tilts anteriorly, so it tilts forward, and it tilts posteriorly, so it tilts backwards. It also shifts up and down, so we have a hip hike. And it also, you can rotate one side forward as the other side goes back. And you can also kind of tilt one side forward and one side back. We'll kind of explore all those movements. None of these movements are necessarily bad movements. Our pelvis wouldn't do them if we weren't supposed to do them. But sometimes we will be more mobile when we should be more stable, and vice versa. So we're going to kind of explore all of those movements, as well as kind of some hip movements that go with the pelvic mobility, and rib cage movement that goes with the pelvic mobility stability. So with that, we're going to start lying on our backs first. Have your blocks and your foam roller somewhere where you can reach them. And we're going to start first by straightening our legs to the ground. And I would suggest having your heels on your mat if they are not on your mat. And toes pointing up. So we're not allowing the legs to splay open right now. We're going to actively point the toes up towards the sky. And feel the backs of your heels on the ground, and feel the back of your pelvis on the ground. You can just allow your hands to rest down by your side. And you might want to watch this first, but you're just going to start to point and flex your feet really fast. And if you notice, my whole body is shaking, kind of moving with that rhythm. So it's like my heels are gripping on the mat. And because I'm pointing and flexing my ankles really fast, my whole body kind of shakes. So we're going to do this for about 30 seconds more. And just as you're doing this, breathe easily. Let everything kind of be heavy and relaxed, except for obviously the pointing and the flexing of the feet. Good. Then bend your knees. Feet flat on the floor. Allow your knees to knock in towards each other, and just pause here for a breath or several. And just kind of notice how that vibration shows up wherever it shows up. And then keep your feet about hip distance apart and allow your knees to open about hip distance apart. Take the heels of your hands. Find those bony, sticky outy bones at the front of your pelvis. Sometimes we call those the hip points. Rest the heels of your hands on the hip points and rest the tips of your fingertips on the pubic bone. And we're going to just do a few pelvic tilts. So as you exhale, push your low back towards the floor, feel the pubic bone lift into your fingertips. And then as you inhale, lift the low back as far off the floor as you can and feel your pubic bone tilt towards the floor. So you're going to go in as far into an anterior tilt. The hip points come towards the tops of the thighs. And then as far back into a pelvic posterior tilt, pubic bone moves towards your navel. And just find as much range of motion as you can in either direction without lifting the hips off the ground. And just kind of keeping your hands on those two regions just to notice how they move as your spine and your pelvis moves. And then you're going to start to each time move a little less. And you are creating this movement by tilting the pelvis, not by pushing the feet into the floor. If you are pushing your feet into the floor, no big deal. Just see if you can do it without. And then as you continue to lessen this each time, pause and stop where you feel that your pelvis is neutral. So the tips of your hip points and your pubic bone would basically lie in one line together. So you don't want to feel one tilt closer to the floor or closer to your thighs. And then grab your block. Place your block between your thighs, either on the narrow, so on those big wide areas, or on the narrow edges, somewhere where you can feel when you press your inner thighs in, it creates a sense of stability. And then bring the tips of your fingertips to your hip points and your thumbs to your rib cage. We're going to lift up and down into a bridge pose. Try to keep your hip points and your rib cage in one plane. So in other words, don't arch your back. Try to keep your spine in neutral as you lift and lower your hips up and down. And notice your tendency to tilt your hip points down towards the tops of your thighs or flaring your ribs up towards your head. And instead, try to keep the ribs stacked over your pelvis or your pelvis stacked over your ribs, depending on how high the hips are, as you go down and up. And just kind of see, can you move the pelvis and the rib cage all as one? And do you feel that one side of your pelvis kind of tilts up or down or side to side? And then lower the hips to the ground. Move your hands to the bottom of your rib cage. Without pressing the low back into the floor, lift your knees over your hips. And so shins are parallel to the ground. We still have our pelvis in neutral. So notice, have you tilted your pubic bone towards your navel? Resist that and try to keep the hip points and the pubic bone in one line. Squeeze the block between your thighs, and you're going to slowly lower the knees to the right and the left. I'm going to switch directions so that you can see if you need to. My rib cage is not really moving. I'm trying to move the pelvis all as one unit. So if I look down at my knees, when I go to one side, the knees stay kind of flush with the edge of the block. I'll show you the difference. You'll see if you go to one side and your pelvis does not move as one, that knee stays behind the other knee. So try to keep the knees in line. So for me, what that means is I have to shift the top leg and pelvis over to the opposite side. And just a couple of more times to either side. Trying to keep your rib cage glued to the floor. It will lift off a little bit, but just imagine that you're trying to keep it glued down as much as possible. Good. Then bring your feet back down to the floor. Remove the block from between your knees. Hug your knees in towards your chest. Rock a little side to side, allowing the low back to now round towards the floor. Good. Bring the legs back down to the ground. Point both of your toes. We're going to reach one leg long as we hike the other hip up and then switch. So as if you're trying to stretch your left leg long and then hike your right hip up and then switch sides. And start to allow this to be more of a somatic movement of letting go of trying to control it. And just allow this to move not only in your pelvis, but feel your spine move, your shoulders move, your head and your neck. So kind of get a little loosey-goosey with this movement and really exaggerate hiking one hip as you reach the other leg long. Good. Release back to center. This time you can use your block, or if you prefer, you can use a foam roller between your thighs. It'll roll a little bit more. Take your hands out to the side. You might want to watch this one first. I'm going to start to press through my right foot first, and I'm going to keep my left hip heavy on the ground. My right hip is lifting until my left hip can no longer. And then when I get to where I can't lift my right hip anymore, I'm going to tilt my pelvis the other way and then lower my right foot or hip down and left hip last. So we're going to do it on one side several times. So we'll start with the right leg. So either the block or a foam roller or even a ball between your thighs. So start to get heavy in your right foot. Left foot stays relatively light. Start to push and then start to lift the right hip point off the floor, letting the left hip tilt down towards the floor. Keep pressing through the right foot only. Left foot hip is just coming around for the ride. Once you get as high as you can on the right side, shift your pelvis. So now the right hip drops towards the floor, left hip lifts higher, lower down. We're going to do that 3 more times. So a total of 5. So right foot, push, 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 knee goes over toe, hip high, then shift your pelvis, lower the right hip first. Good. 2 more. Push through your right foot, reach the knee over your toe, let the left hip lift until it can't lift any higher, and then lift it higher as the right shifts down. Last one. So allowing that pelvis to rotate. And now get stable. You're going to keep your right foot on the ground. Kick your left leg long and steady your pelvis. So I'm squeezing the foam roller between my knees. Arms can be either out to the side or down beside your hips. You're going to lift and lower, so a single leg bridge. But as you lift and lower, notice if the left hip lifts as high as the right hip. This time we are trying to lift them together. We're going to do 3 more. You're pushing the right knee over the toe and lifting the left hip with the right hip. 2 and 1. Good. Keep the roller between your knees and then lift your shins parallel to the floor, knees above your hips, arms out to the side, T to the body. This time we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go all to the right side first. So right, and then straighten your left leg. Push the left foot even further towards the right. Bend the knee, come back to center. We're going to do 4 more of those. Keep the left shoulder on the ground, knees move to the right. As you stretch your left leg long, try to reach through the heel a little bit more. Good. 3 more. Shift as you straighten, kick, left leg longer. So it's almost as if you're trying to shift the left hip even further over to the right. Getting a stretch in your left side body. Good. Come back to the center, remove your roller, pull your knees in towards your chest, make big circles with your hip bones in one direction, and then switch and go through the other direction. And now we're going to repeat all of that on the other side. So take your foam roller or your block or a ball back between your thighs, closer to the knees. We're going to start by pushing first through your left foot. So only push the left foot into the ground until the left hip starts to peel off the floor. The right hip only follows along. We're not pushing into our right foot until we can't lift our left hip any higher. And then we switch, left hip drops down first. 4 more. So feeling each time the weight only in the left foot. Feel that rotation at the top. A slight squeeze between or with the block or the roller between your thighs. Good. Feel how much you can rotate the pelvis. Nice. And then we're going to shift the right leg up. So right leg straight. It can't go straight up towards the sky because you got that block or roller between your thighs. But now we're steadying the pelvis. So as you lift and lower, we're still starting with just pushing through the left foot because the right foot is lifted. Go up and down. And as you go up and down, notice how your pelvis wants to shift side to side, how it wants to hike up or down, how the left side wants to lift a little higher, and see if you can keep it all kind of like you imagine in a concrete block. 1 more. Good. And then keep the roller between your thighs. Lift your hips above, or your knees above your hips. Arms out to the side. We're going to rock our knees to the left. Right shoulder stays on the ground, and then straighten and reach your right leg over to the left. You're doing 5 of these total. So as you reach, think of getting long in your right side, almost as if you're trying to peel your pelvis away from your rib cage to stretch on a diagonal. And 1 more. Good. Release the foam roller from between your thighs. Arms out to the side. Drop both of your legs over to the right. And take a few breaths here. Knees back through center, and drop both of your knees to the left. Awesome. We're going to roll all the way onto our left side and press ourselves up. We're going to come to hands and knees. So we're going to start with your block and your other block. So your block closest to your knee is going to be under your right knee, and you're going to have your left hand on the other block. So if the block is too hard, you can always choose to put a blanket over the block. And to begin with, we're not going to have the left hand on the block. We're just going to have both hands on the floor. I'll show you from this side, and then I'm going to show you from the back side as well. So tuck your right toes under so they're on the ground. Look back at your right hip or your right side body and notice how your hip is over your knee. If you feel yourself shift over to the right or to the left, see if you can stack your hip directly over your right knee. So the first few times we are going to watch this hip. You're going to push down through your right knee and move your left knee up your right inner thigh. And then tap it back down. So the first few times, look back at the right hip and notice how it moves or doesn't move as you do this. So if you feel it pop out to the right as you bring the knee back down. See if you can instead stretch the left knee towards the floor and hug this in by opening your right side body. If when you lift, you feel yourself lean to either side, think of pulling your inner thighs towards each other. So almost as if you want to tap your left knee with your inner right thigh each time you lift. Couple more. And then you're going to take your left leg long. So out to the side, full left foot on the ground, toes pointing towards the long edge of your mat. You're going to lift all the way up onto your knee. And then side bend over towards your left foot. So allow that space between your right hip and your rib cage. Get really long. Good. Bring both hands to the ground. Reach your hip back. Then crawl your right hand in line with your right knee, and now get long on your left side. And you'll notice that you really do have to hike up that right hip. Bring both knees off the block and scoot the block to the front of your mat. Tuck your toes under, reach your hips back into child's pose, and shift your pelvis side to side. Shift forward onto hands and knees. You're going to bring your weight now onto your left knee with it on the ground. Step your right foot straight back into a line. And we're going to make circles with our right knee. So the first few times, we're going to try to not move the pelvis at all. So keep the hips squared towards the floor, go the other direction. And try to just rotate the leg bone inside this hip socket. Now bring your knee towards your chest and try to get as much movement as you can. So as you open, think of stacking the pelvis. Go the other direction. And then swing your right foot up to your right block, the block at the front of your mat. So then foot is on the block. If you need a blanket or something under your left knee, take the moment to do that. So we're going to play with our hips a little bit. So take your right hand out onto your right hip. As you go forward, try to push your knee in and your hip out. And as you come back, suck it in. So try to push the hip out into your hand and then suck it back in. Try to push it out. Suck it back in. And what you might start to notice is that when you do that, in order to push the hip out, you have to shorten the space or hike the hip between your rib cage and your pelvis. Good. Now bring your hands onto your pelvis, pull your pelvis down, and don't let the hip go out to the side. So go forward and back. And kind of remember what it feels like to do both of these things. How easy was it to push the hip out on your right side? How easy is it to steady the pelvis on your right side? Okay. So we're going to come up to stand. So however you want to get there, do that. Have the block off to the side to begin with. So standing on your right foot, cock your left knee out. Bring your hand onto your right hip, push the right hip out. Bring it in. Push the right hip out and bring it in. And again, notice as you do this, how you have to kind of hike that hip up in order to pop the hip out. So you're kind of squeezing that area between the top of your pelvis and your rib cage to pop the hip out. Good. Now let's try it another way. So from the side, from the front, same thing, left knee's cocked forward, but this time we're going to move the hip back. So don't let the hips hike. Think of moving the pelvis straight back. And just notice the difference. Good. Now, what if we tried it on a block? So stand on your block with your right foot. Let the left leg kind of just hang, swing it back and forth a little bit. And then right hand on your hip. Pop the hip out as you bring the left foot to the ground. Stand back up. Pop it out. Stand back up. Notice what you have to do in order to come to that standing position. Feel how that outer hip engages to come to stand upright on the block. Good. Now, I'll show it from the front first. We're not going to pop the hip out. So you're going to have to take the hips back to touch your right foot to the ground or left foot to the ground. So you're still on your right, standing on your right foot. And if this is fairly easy to do without popping that right hip out, you can start to move the foot further out in front of you. And I'll shift so you can see it from the side. Keep practicing that. And you'll notice that my hip goes back in space as my knee goes forward. Good. Stand up straight, and again, just swing the left leg forward and back. And we're going to start to take the left leg back a little further each time. So your right knee is going to go forward, tap, stand up. Tap further back, stand up. Tap further back, stand up. Notice what's happening in this front hip. Can you stand all the way back? And do that a few times with your hand on your hip. Can you keep the hip hugged in instead of hiking and popping the hip out? Good. Next time you go back, stay back. And be in that high lunge with your right foot on the block. Hands to your hips. So staying in the lunge, pop the right hip out, drop the right knee in, hug it back in. Pop it out, so hike, hug it back in. Pop it out, hug it back in. This time, bend the left knee, pop the hip out, hug it back in as you stand up. So let the lunge happen with the hip popping out or hiking. Do a couple more with intentionally popping the hip out. And then hug the hips in. And do 5 with the pelvis still going straight down and up. Good. And take you're going kind of into a modified warrior 2. So right foot is still on the block, but instead of the toes pointing straight towards the long edge, angle your block and your toes to face the front corner, and then step your left leg long. Standing upright, just pop the hips side to side. So right knee is bent, left leg is straight. Just hike side to side. So more with the pelvis than the rib cage. Good, then find center and go as deep into a warrior 2 with your front foot on the block. And yes, this isn't really a warrior 2 because we've got that foot angled in. But we're gonna hold arms out to the side and gaze over your right fingertips. Straighten the right leg, bend the right leg. Straighten and bend. So can you keep your pelvis pretty still as you move in and out of this modified warrior 2? Good. Take your foot off the block and now bring it more into that traditional warrior 2. So we're gonna start not in warrior 2, but toes pointing towards the front edge of your mat, right foot is still on the block. You're gonna start to tilt the whole pelvis. And as you straighten, lift the back leg off. Can you lift just by straightening the front leg? So I have my hand on my left side of my waist. And what I want to do is hike it, but I'm trying to avoid that by keeping my waist long. Good. And then come up, balance, and find whatever variation of a half moon that you can. Good. Come on to hands and knees. Move the block off to the left side of your mat. Touch your toes and sit back in child's pose. And shift your hips side to side. And just notice if all of that attention to the pelvis has made any shifts or changes in how you feel in child's pose, shifting side to side. And come back to tabletop. This time the block is going to be under your left knee. And start just by recognizing how it feels to have one knee higher than the other, how that shows up in your pelvis. Do you naturally feel like you hike a hip in order to accommodate that? And if you notice that that hip is hiked, just try to get longer on that side. Tuck your left toes under, and then start to lift and lower the right knee off the floor. You can look at your left hip, notice if that left hip is moving at all. The hip moves, but you don't want it to shift side to side. So you can think of pushing the knee down into the block in order to lift the opposite knee. Or you can think of sliding the right knee up and down your inner left thigh. Good. Bring both knees back down to the ground. Remove the block from underneath your left knee. Shift your weight now onto your right knee. And we're going to do some exploration first in the hip joint. So keep the pelvis still as you move just the leg bone in circles. And then the opposite direction. And then allow the pelvis to rotate, to move, going in both directions. And then you're going to swing your left foot all the way to the front of your mat onto your block. The left leg is on the block. And we're going to play first with popping the hip out and bringing it in. Popping it out and bringing it in. You can start to go forward as you pop it out. Hug it in as you bring it back. So feel what it feels like. And I told you to remember what it felt like on one side. And what I generally find is that we have a harder time hiking the hip on one side. So just notice if you feel that. And then keep the hips squared and go forward and back. So get long in the waist. And what I notice is that this is my side that really likes to hike. I'm really good at hiking this side. So I'm really trying to stretch that space between the back of my pelvis and my rib cage as I go forward and back. Good. And we're going to come to stand. So however you want to get there. And if you've identified a side that you like to hike, just kind of notice it as you go through the rest of this stuff. So first, stand tall, or we're doing no block first. So pop your right knee out, and then pop your left hip out and in. So feel that first. And notice, is it easier or harder on this side? Does it feel natural? Hiking the hip is not a bad thing. We just tend to hike one hip and never hike the other hip. Good. And now go the opposite. Don't let it hike. So kind of move the hips back and forward. And if it helps to put your hands on your hips so you can see, do I want to do that? And if you know this is your hip hike side, maybe put your thumbs in the region that you would hike your hip and see if you can stretch it long instead to avoid the hiking. Good. Now let's come onto the block. So left foot on the block. First, just let your right leg swing. And even doing this, I notice how much I want to hike my hip. Okay. Now hand to your left hip, touch it down, let it pop out, suck it into stand. This is also the side that I have a hard time balancing on. So I think when I can't find balance, I try to hike the hip, so kind of squeeze that space in order to find stability. And that's not always the best way to find stability. Now keep your pelvis neutral and go down and up. So the hip, if it helps to bring the hand out there, the hip should not go into your hand. The hip should go back. And again, exploring that space, if this is the side that you tend to hike. If it's not, maybe you go back and try the other side. And you can start to walk your right foot further forward as long as you're not popping the hip out to do it. Good. Take a break, stand, and swing. This hip is so much more tired than my other side was. I'm working really hard on this side to stabilize. Good. Now we're going to start to ease back into that lunge. So we're not going to pop the hip out. We're going to knee tracking over your front toe, hip tracks back. Each time you step your right foot back a little bit more. I have my left hand on my hip as a guide to notice. Am I trying to hike the hip and pop the hip out to stabilize? Can I use my hip muscles instead? And then the next time you go back, stay back. We're now in a high lunge. We are going to play with that pop hip out. So back leg stays straight first, just pop and suck it in. So hike, stabilize, hike, hug in, hike, hug in. Now add the lunge. So as you bend the back knee, push the hip out. As you lift up, hug it in. Pop it out, hug it in. Good. We'll do 2 more of those. So 5 with the pop out, with the hip hike. And then we'll do 5 stable. So steady the pelvis and go straight down and up. Woo. Last one. And then take your block, angle the block so the short end kind of angles at the left corner of your mat, and bring your foot on top of the block. Step your right foot out like a modified warrior 2. And we're going to go into bent knee and start by just hiking the hip to either side. And notice if it feels different. This feels completely different to me on this side. So just notice. Good. Then find center and hold. Look out over your left fingertips. Look down at your right knee. Make sure it's stacked right over the right heel. And tuck your tailbone towards the ground. So neutral pelvis. Then we're going to straighten and bend your left knee. Couple more. Aiming the knee over the second and third toe and trying to steady the pelvis. So notice that that hip hike is trying to happen and resist that. Stay wide and open on the left side. Good. Come off the block. And now we're going to stand on the block. Toes facing the short edge of your mat. Torso facing the long edge of your mat. We're going to start to keep your waist long on both sides. Sometimes I find that it helps if I stick my thumbs right in that squishy part of my low back so that I can notice if I try to hike a hip in order to stabilize. So we're going to avoid that now. We've been playing with it because it's not wrong. But can you start to lift and tilt over your left foot, keeping both sides of your waist long? And you can start to lift your right leg further away from the ground. If you can keep both the left and the right side of your waistline long. And you're going to find the tilt, so the closest to half moon that you can, keeping the waist long on either side. Good. Release. Move the block out of the way. Come down into a forward fold. Bend the knees. Bend the knees enough to bring your hands to the floor. And then bend one knee as you straighten the other knee. So let your pelvis shift side to side. You can let the waistline get short on one side, the bent knee side, as you straighten and lengthen the waist on the other side. Then walk your hands forward to the front edge of your mat. In child's pose. Come high up onto your toes and do the same thing. So as you bend one knee towards the opposite side of your mat, crunch that side of your waist as you lengthen the other side. So you can think of stretching your tailbone towards the bent knee side to create more space in the opposite side. Walk your hands back towards your feet and roll up. So I'm going to show you this. If you have a foam roller, it's probably easier than a block. But if you don't have a foam roller, you can use a block. We're going to have our right knee, tip of the right knee on the short end of the foam roller, and your heels right under your knee. You're going to come up onto your back toes and square towards the wall in front of you. I'm going to show you here, and then I'm going to move so you can see it from the back as well. So knee is keeping the foam roller still. You're going to drop your back knee towards the ground as you rotate your rib cage towards your right inner thigh. Then you're going to go the opposite way and drop your back heel down. So we're going to do 8 of those. Left knee goes towards the floor as you rotate towards your right thigh. Knee continues to press the roller as you rotate your pelvis open. So this is 3. So you're kind of pivoting on your back toes to twist into the front leg. And then you're pivoting and dropping your heel to the ground as you straighten the back leg. Opening the pelvis forward. And let's do 2 more. Good. Remove the foam roller, switch it to the other leg. And so you can see it from the back. Align your heel under your left knee. Knee is holding the roller to the wall. Come onto your back toes. Your feet are about hip distance apart. Bend your back knee towards the floor as you rotate your belly towards your inner left thigh. and then open as you drop the heel down. So this left hip is not popping out. So if you want to try bringing your left hand onto the side of your hip, you'll see that the hip relatively stays in line with your knee or the foam roller. And one more. Good. Do the same thing, but we're going to change the direction of the foam roller. So now you're going to stand with your side next to the wall. Your right inner knee is going to hold the foam roller still. Same thing we just did. We're going to do 5, and then we're going to turn around and do 5 more. So inner knee, drop your left knee towards the floor as you twist your belly towards your inner right thigh. Keep squeezing the knee into the foam roller as you turn to face the wall. 3. Again, hip on the outer right, hand on the outer right hip can help you feel if you're trying to pop it out. Good. Same knee, but turn around. Now you're going to hold it with the outside of your right knee. So feet about hip distance apart. Right knee stays bent the whole time. We're going to turn towards the wall. Left knee goes towards the floor. Keep pressing the knee into the roller as you rotate open. We're doing 5. This is 3 for me. 4. And 5. Good. And of course, we want to be even. So now we're going to go to left leg forward. So you can continue to face the same direction. We'll do inside of the knee first. So foam roller inside the left knee. Come on to your right toes, feet hip distance apart. Right knee goes towards the floor as you twist in. My left hip is staying kind of still the whole time. And I'm rotating my pelvis around my front leg bone. I think my headphones just died. Good. And then we'll do 5 on the other side. Lisa, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. It's just my right headphone died. Okay. So now left outside of the knee. Feet hip distance apart. Come into that lunge. Twist towards. You're feeling the whole pelvis. If you bring your hands on side of both of your hips, you can feel how the pelvis rotates open and closed. Do your 5. And then remove the foam roller. You can come back to your mat. Take your feet into a wide stance. Hands on your pelvis. You're going to rotate the pelvis over your leg bones. So spine stays long. And bring your hands either to the floor or blocks. Bend both of your knees. And then shift to the right as you straighten your left knee. And then go to the other side. So we're never fully coming up to where both knees are straight. We're just shifting side to side. Turn your left toes out and up as you shift to the right into a skandasana. Walk your hands through, stay as low as you can, and go to the other side. Your right toes pointing up. You can be on your left heel or you can have your left heel off the ground. Shift back up into that wide leg forward fold and heel toe your toes back to center. And then come to kneel. Toes touch, knees wide, sit back into a child's pose and shift your pelvis side to side. And shift forward, come to lie on your back. Draw both knees in towards your chest. Round your low back towards the floor. Drop your left foot down to the ground. Cross your right ankle over your left knee. As you push your knee open wide, also let the space between the top of your pelvis and your rib cage get wide. And kind of lengthen, stretch your pelvis away from your ribs. Keep that space as you lift your left knee off the ground. Only grab behind your thigh if you can keep that space wide. Only pull it closer if you can pull it closer without hiking your right hip. And drop your left foot to the ground. Keep your right ankle over your left knee and drop your legs to the left. So your right foot will rest on the floor as your right knee continues to face towards the sky. Get long in your waist. Uncross your right foot and bring your knees back to center. Cross your left ankle over your right knee. As you push your left knee open, lengthen the space between the top of your pelvis and your rib cage. Not at the expense of hiking the other side. So keep both sides of your waist long. If you can keep your waist long, pick your right foot off the ground, grab behind your thigh or in front of your shin, and keep your waistlines long. And drop your right foot to the ground. Keep your left ankle on your right knee as you drop both of your legs over to the left or to the right. The bottom of your left foot will land on the ground. The right knee continues to point up towards the sky. Open the left side of your body. Uncross your left leg and bring both knees back to center and draw the knees in towards your chest. Whatever additional movement you need at this time, welcome it in, even if that means staying still. And whenever you are ready, you can roll to either side to press up to sit as we complete our pelvic mobility stability class.